the most important aspect of the ongoing AU reform?
The AU reforms are hugely important for the African Union, but I think more so for the continent, right? When I was fortunate enough to be invited by President Kagame to sit on the reform committee. And as we went through it, we realized there are a number of reforms that need to happen for the AU to get closer to the African citizens, and for us to really transform how the AU operates. So, as you know, we've come up with 20 recommendations that were all approved by all the presidents. Everything ranging from what the AU should focus on, to how the AU should be organized, to how the AU's leadership to be selected, to how the AU should be financed. And so all of these elements, I would say, are absolutely critical for the reform. If I had to pick one that's even more critical, I would say is financing. We, as an organization, have not been able to fund it ourselves. You know, most of the funding today comes from non-African members. And if we are going to drive our own development as a continent, it's important that we finance our development. So I think the financing, above everything else for me, is the most important component of the reform.
From your experience, what can African states do to better maximize the opportunity of fora like the General Assembly?
Well, I think the General Assembly is one that brings together leaders from all over the world, right? And it's important for Africa to be represented, and in general, I think Africa is quite well represented at this forum. I think what's more important beyond representation is for, as a continent, for us to have a common position on certain key topics, and that's part of what we try to do with the reforms, to make sure that there is a standard position that we all rally behind as a continent, so we can have the weight of the continent behind us when we're defending this position. So I think, you know, it's always good for networking, for reconnecting with colleagues from all over the world, and even colleagues from Africa. We don't get to see each other that often, given how big the continent is. But more importantly, I think it's one where we really need to, for some of the big topics and big items that are on the agenda, to make sure we come with one voice and represent Africa in a united way.
How can Africa prepare a more competitive and nurturing environment for businesses to thrive and for diaspora to come home and contribute to society?
Well, I mean, for businesses to thrive across the continent, a number of things have to happen. The good news is actually we're seeing a number of businesses doing very, very well. We at McKinsey actually have just written a book called Africa's Business Revolution, where we really set out to understand what it takes to build a successful and profitable business across Africa. And we found a number of businesses who've been able to do that. We studied them, we interviewed a number of business leaders from Africa and from outside Africa. We surveyed 1,000 executives. We also reflected on the 3,000 projects we've done as McKinsey across the continent. We did some proprietary research through our Global Institute to really distill what it takes to win. And I think, you know, the number of things, but at the end of the day, what we found is, I'd say, 2 or 3 things. One is businesses have to take a long-term perspective. Governments need to help in improving the ease of doing business in their environments, but as businesses, you have to take a long-term perspective. The second thing we found is that businesses that actually do the best are those who do well by doing good. So they're in it not just to make money, which, you know, is important for many of the businesses, but they need to make a difference and to solve a challenge on the continent. So that, you know, if you come with a mindset of, I want to make a difference, I want to help address a certain issue, generally you'll actually do well on the back of that, right? So that's the second thing that we found was important to businesses in the continent. And the third thing we found that was really important for businesses in terms of how they should think about operating in Africa is talent. Talent is actually critical, and being able to find and hire the right talent. Relationships, being closer to the environment, being on the ground is hugely important. And for all of these, we need governments to create the right enabling environment for the businesses to succeed. Those are some of the insights we found from the book.
African governments are now gaining revenue and funds from donors without the usual limitations and restrictions on what to spend it on. What will you advise African leaders to prioritize in the coming years?
I mean, as African leaders, or our African leaders, there are a number of things I guess they need to prioritize. We do a lot of work with leaders, and there are always conflict of interest, and we're always constrained by the amount of funds that that governments have to invest. So I think a couple of things. There's been a lot of talk about indebtedness. Are we getting too indebted? So that's something we need to watch out for. Above everything else, we think it's hugely important to make sure you have the right macroeconomic stability, because without that, you won't get investments flowing into your country, and we've seen that in many, many cases. So make sure you have the right macroeconomic stability is absolutely critical. But we believe that there's a huge opportunity for governments to generate their own resources, so there's domestic resource mobilization. Today, Africa as a whole collects about $300 billion of tax revenue if you take out rents from resources. We believe you can double that to about $600 billion, which again you can use to invest in development. We think governments tend to be actually quite inefficient, and the huge opportunities to actually reduce costs of government without reducing the services that are being offered, without reducing the quality of the services. And we're doing some projects like that to help governments figure out how to reduce costs of government so that you can free up capacity to invest in other areas. So we think, in addition, before just going and getting more debt, government should really look internally and say, how can I increase revenues? And there are a number of ways to do that. How can I reduce costs? And how can I attract more foreign investments? Where do I need to get out as a government and leave the space for the private sector to thrive and to invest? So those are a few things I'd suggest governments do. In addition to also, of course, looking at where, if need be, I can take on more debt.
Given your impressive background, what advice will you provide to the youth, to young people who are aspiring leaders?
I mean, my advice to the youth will be especially to African youth, I think we always talk a lot about the challenge of the continent, but I would advise them to really take an opportunity lens. To say for every challenge there's an opportunity, right? It just depends on how you look at it. And we found that people who've been, the most successful people are people who've taken that kind of an approach. They've looked at the opportunity behind the challenge and figured out how to resolve that opportunity. So that's my first advice. The second then would be to actually do something about it. It's very, very easy to sit back and complain about our governments, about our leaders, about this and about that. I don't think we have enough people who say, look, there's an issue here, let me do something about it, right? It could be a small problem that you're going to do something about, it could be something bigger, but getting into a mindset and a habit of saying, look, instead of just complaining, let me actually do something about it. And the final thing I would say to the youth is, reflect on what is that drives your life. You could take some time to really get to the bottom of that. There's a question I always ask myself that really guides everything I do in my life, and that is, would it have mattered to Africa that I lived? That's important for me. I think everybody has their own question, so I'll just encourage you to just spend time to reflect on what is that question, because once they figure that out, that this is what they want to do on the mission in life, then it'll be much easier to actually go after it and make it happen.
Thank you. And one last question. In one word, how would you describe the future of Africa?
I think Africa, in terms of describing the future of Africa, I'm a massive optimist, right? I think Africa has an extremely bright future. Our best is ahead of us, and that's not one word, so I'll just say optimistic.
Thank you.